Today's video is brought to you by NordVPN. They are a peaceful and quiet people until a wizard knocked on Bag End. But what came before those adventures? Where did the Hobbits really come from? Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword. Today we are looking at the history of the Hobbits and their cultures.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
When Peter Jackson brought The Lord of the Rings to the cinemas in 2001 with the debut of The Fellowship of the Ring, a whole influx of people entered into the magical realms of Middle-earth, a world of magic and heartbreaking beauty with unique places and peoples. Followed by then, the critically acclaimed The Two Towers in 2002 and The Return of the King in 2003. The trilogy was the most successful adaptation of the late, great J.R.R. Tolkien's famous novel, and I, for one, was one of those people who came into the world thanks to those movies. Since then, a new generation of fans have come into a rich community, and for those seeking more content, fans of this adaptation would be richly rewarded. Today we're talking about the history of the Hobbits from their earliest recorded history until the time of The Lord of the Rings. Understanding Hobbits through Tolkien's creation and the histories of these peoples shows us what Tolkien believed and idealized goodness really was. The Hobbits have their roots in the Elder Days, but have no records or memory of that vanished time, though the prologue of The Lord of the Rings concerning Hobbits tells us of the culture, character, and characters of three different Hobbit breeds in Tolkien's words, which diverged from what had been a singular group. However, before we jump into the writings, please let me just pause this video for a moment to let you know about today's sponsor, NordVPN. They have been amazing to support us in creating our Middle-earth content. But now, imagine this. You are a Hobbit of the Shire sitting in your hillside home. Lobelia Sackville Baggins then turns up at your door. You run, you hide your silverware, and hope to Eru she will just leave. You have hidden away in the kitchen and made her believe that you are now in fact somewhere else instead. This is essentially what Nord can do for you on up to 6 of your devices at the same time. They have servers with the speed of a sprinting dwarf, 24/7 customer support, and protection anywhere you go, from the Shire to Wales, to Bree to the USA. Another great bonus too. Imagine the situation where you are sat at home. You go to put on the Fellowship of the Ring to see Frodo and his friends set off on their adventure. But no, it is not available in your country. Well, with the help of NordVPN, that is no longer an issue. Just change your region and boom, like Gandalf's speaking friend to enter, you can watch to all your heart's content. So what have you got to lose? Use our exclusive link that will be pinned in the comment section below or as shown on screen to get your risk-free NordVPN deal. This is a limited time offer though, so why leave yourself potentially vulnerable online when you can have this safety? And for a great discount too. So with you now safe with the knowledge of NordVPN, let's break down the breeds of Hobbits. The beginning of Hobbits lies far back in the Elder Days that are now lost and forgotten. Only the elves still preserve any records of that vanished time, and their traditions are concerned almost entirely with their own history, in which men appear seldom and hobbits are not mentioned at all. Yet it is clear that hobbits had, in fact, lived quietly in Middle-earth for many long years before other folk came even aware of them. And the world being after all full of strange creatures beyond count, these little people seemed of very little importance. But in the days of Bilbo and of Frodo his heir, they suddenly became, by no wish of their own, both important and renowned, and troubled the councils of the wise and the great. These events are said to have taken place in the past, but in the Third Age, after the shape of all lands has again changed. Despite this, the place where hobbits now dwell in Middle-earth in the Third Age are, as Tolkien writes, how the regions in which the hobbits then lived were doubtless the same as those that they had lingered in all that time before, more like the northwest of the old world, east of the sea. What life was like before the population split, very little is actually known, but the moment of divergence is roughly pinpointed. Their own records began only after the settlement of the Shire, and their most ancient legends hardly looked further back than their wandering days. It is clear, nonetheless, from these legends and from the evidence of their peculiar words and customs, that, like many other folk, hobbits had in the distant past moved westward. Their earliest tales seem to glimpse a time when they dwelt in the upper vales of Anduin, between the eaves of Greenwood the Great and the Misty Mountains. Why they later undertook the hard and perilous crossing of the mountains into Eriador is no longer certain. Their own accounts speak of the multiplying of men in the land, and of a shadow that fell on the forest, so that it became darkened, and its new name was Mirkwood. One thing is given as a certainty, however. There is the division of the hobbits into 3 distinctive breeds, which are the Harfoots, the Stoors, and the Fallohides. Of the Harfoots we read that they were browner of skin, smaller and shorter, and they were beardless and bootless. Their hands and feet were neat and nimble, and they preferred highlands and hillsides. Whereas as for the Stoors, they were broader, heavier in build, their feet and hands were larger, and they preferred flatlands and riversides. And they also lived for long on the shores of the great river Anduin. They were the second to go west after the Harfoots, and followed the course of the Loudwater southwards. And there were many of them that long dwelt between Tharbad and the borders of Dunland before they were moved north again. Then we move on to the last group, the Fallohides, as they were fairer of skin and also of hair, and they were taller and slimmer than the others. They were lovers of trees and of woodlands. The Fallohides were the first of them to later learn the language of Westron, in fact, and the only ones to preserve some of their older histories too. Again, in fact, they learned Westron from the men of Arnor, so the Dunedain, and it was then also they who first learned writing, which makes sense why they were the only ones to preserve some of their older histories. Not only do they differ at a point in time and diverge along different genetic paths, they also encountered and were subsequently influenced to greater or lesser extent by their relationships with, first, the land, and second, the inhabitants of Middle-earth. The Harfoots had much to do with the dwarves in ancient times, living in the foothills of the mountains. They had reached Eriador and had made it on so far as Weathertop, while others were still in the Wilderland. Tolkien is sure to remind us. They were the most normal and representative variety of hobbit, and far more numerous. They were the most inclined to settle in one place, and longest preserved their ancestral habit of living in tunnels and holes. For a hobbit to live in a hole in the ground is as natural and common as dew on the morning grass. And from their oral traditions and scattered records, this love of coziness and warmth has long been a trait shared by every hobbit, whether Fallowhide, Stoor, or Harfoot. Now this next bit will be a bit of a longer quote, but I do think sometimes it is just better to take the words of Tolkien himself. The Fallowhides, the least numerous, were a northerly branch. They were more friendly with elves than the other hobbits were, and had more skill in language and song than in handicrafts, and of old they preferred hunting to tilling. They crossed the mountains north of Rivendell and came down the river Horwell. In Eriador they soon mingled with the other kinds that had preceded them, but being somewhat bolder and more adventurous, they were often found as leaders or chieftains among clans of Harfoots or Stoors. Even in Bilbo's time, the strong Fallowhidish strain could still be noted among the greater families, such as the Tooks and the Masters of Buckland. In the westlands of Eriador, between the Misty Mountains and the Mountains of Lune, the hobbits found both men and elves. Indeed, a remnant still dwelt there of the Dunedain, the kings of men that came over the sea out of Westerness, but they were dwindling fast, and the lands of their north kingdom were falling far and wide into waste. There was room and to spare for incomers, and ere long the hobbits began to settle in ordered communities. Most of their earlier settlements had long disappeared and been forgotten in Bilbo's time, but one of the first to become important still endured, though reduced in size. This was at Bree and in the Chetwood that lay round about, some 40 miles east of the Shire. It was in these early days, doubtless, that the Hobbits learned their letters and began to write after the manner of the Dunedain, who had in their turn long before learned the arts from the elves. And in those days they also forgot whatever languages they had used before, and spoke ever in the common speech, the Westron as it was named, that was current through all the lands of the kings of Arnor to Gondor, and about all the coasts of the sea from Balfalas to Lune. Yet they kept a few words of their own, as well as their own names of months and days, and a great store of personal names out of the past. So with that look at the Hobbits and their coming to the Shire, I thought it would also be quite interesting to have a quick exploration of Tolkien's personal inspiration for this peaceful land and the peoples that came with it by looking at the real life Shire and then what has come of it now. Tolkien was just 3 years old when he first visited the famous Sarehole Mill, and many others than someone as special as this man could be inspired in such a way by this. He loved the Worcestershire countryside that he did grow up in, and it really does show. One of the most exciting things for a young J.R.R. Tolkien to see was the village of the Mill, which he always called the Great Mill, and in fact he first painted with his brush in The Hobbit. And as the Hobbits coalesced down from the north and over mountains, falling in love with all things fresh, natural, the country air, and folksy great outpouring of sentiment which comes with these attachments. I mentioned the inspiration of the Great Mill of Tolkien's youth on the world of Middle-earth, and especially in the development of the Shire. But unfortunately, after the author's death and decades of neglect and exposure, a water wheel gave it up. At the time, in 1960, Tolkien donated a large fund to restore the mill after years of disuse and wear. In 1969, it had opened up again to the public. Tolkien in fact said this when talking about the Shire and its uncanny resemblance to the Warwickshire village in one of his letters, being letter 178 to Allen and Unwin. Tolkien wrote, "The Shire is not far from North Oxford. It is in fact more or less a Warwickshire village of about the period of the Diamond Jubilee. That is as far away as the Third Age from that depressing and perfectly characterless straggle of houses north of Old Oxford, which has not even a postal existence." Eventually, the mill would again fall into disrepair, as Frodo would not remain in the Shire and, far from using pipe bellows for clearing chimneys, he rode on the back of Shadowfax and heard words older than the earth. So much destruction, his own mill burned down during the War of the Ring. You can see where the inspiration came from. Although a few years back, the mill recently did get funding by the H.B. Allen Charitable Trust to restore it to its full working order. It was originally constructed in the 18th century, so this was no small feat to do. In 2018, there was a crowdfunding plea to make the wheel work again, and it succeeded, so that is a great thing. Tolkien would have been proud. At the mill, they were able to use the wheel to produce stone ground flour and bake bread on site once again. This would be available to all the local people as well, it wasn't just a one-off. Tolkien's Great Mill has long been a symbol of the Hobbits, and in recent years fans came together to restore it. It just shows great people are always out there. There is always hope, and Tolkien was right to be inspired by this place. So there we have it, a look at the Hobbits, their histories, and a little bit of the real life Shire. We can see how all we know from The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is really just the memoirs of Bilbo and Frodo Baggins, as so much before their time is undocumented in great detail. They are very much ancient people, having in the times before the Shire been far more numerous than how they ended up at the end of the Third Age. In the beginning, they came in 3 clans of the Harfoots, the Stoors, and the Fallohides. They have had people friendly with men, friendly with the dwarves, friendly with the elves over all of the years. Albeit as a people in general, they did like to keep themselves more to themselves when it came to those larger problems of the outside world. They are well and truly wonderful beings for their love of peace, quiet, and good-tilled earth. I, for one, would never say no to the chance to have just one of their 6 daily meals with such mighty and admirable folk. It is said their Shire reckoning did not start until around 1600 years into the Third Age, and it is a shame that their histories before this time are lost to the winds, as I'm sure there was an adventure or two that took place before the times of Bilbo and Frodo as well. However, like I said, these adventures are lost just to them. So with that, now it is time for my question of the day, which is, which breed of Hobbit do you think that you would come from? Do you see yourself as more of a Harfoot, of a Stoor, or are you in fact a Fallowhide? Let me know all of your thoughts on this in the comment section below. And now it is time to shout out our patrons. You guys are the ones letting us be able to make our own short film in the background of all things, and I cannot thank you all enough. Firstly, we have our Divine Power tier members of Kevin and Abram. You are both awesome. And a big thanks to our Fire Demon tier members of Nashith, Denversteel and Gregory. You are amazing people. And as well, I cannot forget the Wizard Staff tier members of John, Andrew and Jennifer. You are all true legends of the Brohirrim. Finally, if you have managed to reach the end of this video with me today and you are enjoying what you've seen, then please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon too, with all notifications ticked so that you will know when all of our future videos go up. And again, also thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. Remember to check out our exclusive deal in the description or comment section below. So one last thing to say thank you for all of you for spending just some time with me today, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.